How would you describe hydrogen to a layperson and its importance in the energy transition? Molly?
Is this where? Okay, it's working. So as you saw from me dropping my microphone on the stage, managing multiple things is not my forte. So I think the irony of that question is only truly known to my chemistry teacher from grade 10 or 11 that I was being asked about the element being the first on the periodic table, if we look to the title of this session. But I mean, I think when we think about hydrogen, it's a clean fuel. Canada, we have such an advantage because it is produced from those natural resources where we have a huge advantage, and so that's really important. It's produced by technology and innovation that we here in Canada have produced for a long time. It's not new, it's something that's very rooted in our economy and in our people. And we have a history with our energy system, and so our people have a long time doing this. So that's, you know, when I think about hydrogen, it's the what it is as the clean fuel, but also the how we get it done. But then why is it important to the energy transition? We know that, you know, we talk a lot about electrification, we talk a lot about sort of the different pathways for decarbonization, but we can't electrify everything. And so we really need to be thinking about the mix of energy that we're going to need to get from where we are to our decarbonization goals. And so that's why it is critically important that we have these options and opportunities to look at different things in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, as we're thinking about what we're trying to do.
Okay, I'm actually going to pick up on that point a little later, but let's keep going down the row here. Dr. Kaufman, what would you say about hydrogen and its potential in the energy transition?
Yes, thank you for the invitation to this panel here. So we heard a lot about why hydrogen is really a game changer to reach our climate goals. It's why we need green molecules and not only green electrons to decarbonize in hard-to-avoid sectors, but it's much more important for Europe, for example. We can transport the green energy from areas with infinite potential of green energy to Europe by shipping it as a fuel, by shipping it as ammonia or liquid hydrogen in the future. That is what makes hydrogen really to a game changer, also to decarbonize Germany. If we have an import demand of up to 80% of our green hydrogen in the future. And let me say that because I'm here also for speaking for the European Union. Europe is a global leader in green technologies and hydrogen technologies at the moment. But we see that we need global action and global cooperation to reach our global climate goals. And that's why the European Union is very committed to strengthen the cooperation in the hydrogen sector with Canada in 3 areas. First, to strengthen our research, cooperation and development of skills. Second, in the area of looking for supply chains from Canada to Europe, especially from Western Canada to from Eastern Canada, Quebec, for example, or Ontario to Europe. And the third sector about working on a common regulatory framework, about standards, for example, which is really necessary that we work on global standards together, European Union and Canada.
Mm-hmm. John?
Yeah, so just to pick up on what's being said, I think that the 2 most sort of useful data points to carry around in your mind is that 1, hydrogen is already a huge industry around the world. You can't make steel, you can't refine oil, you can't make fertilizer without it. And the production of hydrogen today is very carbon intensive, accounts for more than 2% of the world's global emissions. And 2% may not sound like a big deal, but if you combine the carbon footprint of both the UK and Indonesia, it's about that same number. So it is a big deal. So if we can, the point is that if we can convert the production of hydrogen today, just in existing use cases, to green, that has obviously a big impact on the global carbon emission footprint. The second thing, and the doctor just sort of mentioned this, but it's really important to understand, hydrogen is a mechanism to transport electricity made with renewables from where you can do it very cost efficiently to where it's much more expensive. So if you think about wind farms in Europe, and we all go to Europe on a regular basis, and you can't travel around Europe today without seeing evidence of wind farms. And really, there's no more land mass. All the good areas for wind have already been consumed, okay? And that makes sense to go right into the grid. And now we're in offshore, and you can't fly anywhere in the, and go over the North Sea or go to the UK without looking down and seeing wind farms. Same thing. Well, we have, when was the last time you saw a wind farm in Atlantic Canada, for instance, or across the country? The point is we have huge land mass. We've got a really good quality wind resource. We all hope we might have a better quality solar resource. But the point is we can make electricity in this country very much more cost efficiently than you can in Europe today. But we can't move the electricity to Europe, right? And we need hydrogen. Hydrogen is the mechanism by which we can move that cheap electricity to Europe, where it's got, obviously, a very compelling market opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Well, that dovetailed very nicely to Molly, what you were talking about as well, about how hydrogen will be an important piece. And part of it, too, I think, is because if you go back, way back, it was actually thought it would be hydrogen vehicles that would replace, gas-powered engines. Instead, there's now this choice over batteries, the development of battery industries. So where does hydrogen come in then? In a practical sense, what spaces will it fill where batteries cannot?
You want to start with me?
Perfect.
Well, and, I think people will get tired of me talking about regional systems or choices and planning, but it matters. So, one example is the hub model for hydrogen that is being set up in various parts of our country. In Edmonton, there's a very successful, and in Alberta, there's a hub models where for medium and heavy-duty vehicles, hydrogen is the right fuel choice. It doesn't require you to be as bound to going back to the charger every single night when you're doing the work of your shipping routes and that sort of thing. So it becomes very effective and efficient. So I think it depends sort of what mode of transportation you're going to use, but it also requires some planning, because if you do have a hydrogen vehicle and you're doing a trade corridor route all the way down to Mexico, if they don't have hydrogen down there, you're kind of scuppered. So you have to be thinking about where you're going, where you're coming back to, how the system is planned. So I don't think we can be as binary about we're going to electrify or use hydrogen everywhere, but we do need to think about what are the best opportunities in each part of our country. If we're, producing hydrogen with natural gas where we have that advantage, perhaps that's a better opportunity, whereas if you're using it in different parts of the country, what works best for us? So, yeah.
Now, there are distinctions in terms of hydrogen, and I'm thinking about the color coding here. Green hydrogen versus blue hydrogen versus the color of 2021. Turquoise hydrogen. So, Dr. Coffin, could you talk to us a bit about the different processes that are used to develop it and the distinctions, the color coding that's applied to it as well?
Yes, first to say hydrogen is a gas, invisible gas, which has no color. So the color is about a production method. So gray hydrogen is hydrogen made in a reforming process by natural gas. And the big problem is by producing 1 kilogram of gray hydrogen, we emit 9 kilogram of CO2. So that's what we want to avoid with hydrogen we produce. So at the moment we have at the end only gray hydrogen in the world for chemical production. And that's why we look now for other methods to produce. So if we capture the CO2 in the process from reforming, that's what carbon capture and storage or carbon capture and usage. It's a blue hydrogen with nearly no emissions anymore. So we can use the CO2, for example, to produce e-fuels, or we can store it below the sea, for example. That was Norway's doing, and also Alberta and a lot of countries talking about. So producing blue hydrogen at the end, outcome of the reforming process using natural gas. And then we have the green hydrogen. It's splitting water by renewable energies in oxygen and hydrogen. We have also some red or pink hydrogen is splitting the water by nuclear energy. That was France is doing, for example. Or we have the turquoise hydrogen that is at the end is also based on natural gas, but the product is not a gas. The product is a a solid carbon coming out, and can use it maybe for streets, for example, to build streets. So that is turquoise. But the problem turquoise, it's a very low level at the moment. So we think that we can have it in a commercial level maybe at 2030, not before, maybe 2028, but it's not exist. It's only research at the moment. So what we do have is blue hydrogen, is green hydrogen, is gray hydrogen, and also red and pink hydrogen.
John, do you think the color distinction matters in terms of developing an industry and harnessing the potential of it all?
Look, resolving the climate crisis requires all hands on deck and every gun blazing, right? So, is blue hydrogen as good as green hydrogen? I mean, if you were sort of a purist in the matter, you would say, no, we need green. We shouldn't have blue because blue continues to, there are issues with blue and we're continuing to emit, although we're trying to capture all the emissions. And is that capture process 100% effective? So far, it's not. But look, I think that's a silly argument to make. The answer is we need blue because blue is an existing business or a function of an existing business that has carbon capture attached to it. And we need absolutely go down that road as fast as we possibly can. Do we need green? Yeah, absolutely. We need green too. Because we're not going to electrify every vehicle in the world today. We can't build the power generation and the electrical grid necessary to do that. So hydrogen has a role to play in hard to decarbonize sectors like shipping, for instance. And we heard in a previous conversation about its role in making green steel, and we need green steel. So we need every single color except for gray.
And what's interesting, Molly, is that the government's tax credit programs, it actually doesn't really rely on the color.
Well, it's hard to regulate the rainbow. And so I think, looking at carbon intensity is really the thing that we want to be thinking about. So as as we move towards carbon neutrality, move towards net zero, as we're moving towards 2050, we've got to think about, for all of our fuels, how are we consistently moving ourselves down to net zero? And so, we can look at numbers, we can try and figure out how we get from where we are to where we want to be. But I think that's ultimately, and just as John was saying, that's the goal. We've got to be all hands on deck and figuring out how we're constantly working together to find that way to lower carbon intensity. And I would just also say as well, the work that we do internationally is very important because, we're a panel of international people here who are trying to figure out not just what we do in our own country, but how do we build those relationships so we can take our product from one place to another. And again, we've got to be able to measure that. We've got to have common standards. We have to be able to verify that. And again, coming back to those numbers of carbon intensity and what works and can we trade and verify what we're doing, that's going to be critically important as well. And so trying to figure out how it's made, okay, but really what are we producing and what is the value and impact on the environment, that's what's critically important.
Dr. Kaufman?
Just want to add something. I think the tax credit, the Canadian, it was compared to the IRA in the United States, is a very good incentive compared to the incentives we have in Europe at the moment. So, and you see, it's a distinction between the level of carbon intensity. That's good. I just want to add from the European side, if we talk about investments from European side in Canada, we have to be honest, and that's what also Ursula von der Leyen stated when she was here, that EU investments in Canada will only go to green projects if it's EU level. I don't talk about private investments, but if you talk about EU investments, we talk about green investments. That I want to add.
So where would you, at this point, John, describe the industry here in Canada in terms of its development and really harnessing its potential? Where are we as a country?
We're in the middle of a race. Canada has no particular sort of license to win this race other than we do have a really good quality wind resource and we're large producers of gray, which means that we can be large producers of blue. So we have a seat at the table. The question is, will we make use of that seat? And look, the government, to its credit, is saying all the right things. And I have been around business and government for longer than I'd care to remember. And I don't know that I've ever seen any government is committed to a policy, as I think this government is, I worry that we need to move quickly. We are in a global race. And can there be multiple winners? Yes, there can be multiple winners because the energy industry is enormous, as we know. But the supply chain for this emerging industry, because it is emerging. I mean, there are 0 large green hydrogen projects anywhere in the world today. None. There are none, right? We can be amongst the leading field. But the point is the supply chain capable of standing up these projects is very, very thin. And you are going to see, once the rules around the IRA get promulgated and Treasury finishes designing those rules, an enormous amount of capital that's going to flow into projects in the United States. And that will consume the supply chain for years. We need to be part of that early supply chain process. We can't wait. We've got to get going. And so am I optimistic? Yes, but that's what keeps me awake at night.
Where's the public-private mix in that?
Yeah, I mean, look, government has put in place a framework in response to the IRA that I think we've largely heard this morning is competitive, but there's a lot of details that still have to be worked out. Details around what the tax credits exactly apply to and what, by definition, they may not apply to. We need to have that information. Contracts for difference, in my opinion, are really important. My personal view is that I don't want contracts for difference to be a subsidy. I want them to be a market-generating activity that sets a floor, and hopefully we can trade, the market will mature, and I'm hoping the doctor will agree with me here, to the point where pricing will be in excess of that floor. But there is no market today, and if you're going to spend $10 or $15 billion on a project, you can't do that. You can't finance it in the absence of some sort of market commitment. And so contracts for difference have a really meaningful role to play in that, but I don't want them to be a subsidy. That's a very important distinction.
Dr. Kaufman, what would you say about the potential here? In terms of John saying that he was hoping that you would agree with him that at some point the cost factor.
I completely agree. There is no, as he said, there are a lot of announcements, around 250 to 300 billion euros of announcements, around 600 announcements globally for green hydrogen projects. But very few, maybe 10% of them are finance investment decisions, because at the end we have a lot of obstacles. We don't have the electrolyzer capacity. We don't have the infrastructure. So talking about Germany, we have a lot of technologies. We have a lot of companies looking for green hydrogen, but we don't have the infrastructure to bring the green hydrogen to the backland from Germany. So we need the pipelines, for example. If we have to ship the green hydrogen as ammonia, what we have to do, because you can't ship the liquid hydrogen at the moment, you need a cracker. There are no crackers worldwide in a big scale to crack the hydrogen out of the ammonia. So that is what we have to develop. And as far as we don't have that, very few companies can sign an FID. And that's why all the projects are announced but not started so far. That's what you said. I completely agree.
Molly, in terms of infrastructure, where can investments be made? Where do investments need to be made in terms of establishing infrastructure for the industry?
Oh my, that's a very big question. I mean, there's a lot of pieces that have to be built, and maybe I'll just back it up to say, I'm in full agreement about the potential that we are holding right now. Huge momentum in trying to figure out what our opportunity is. Our proof is going to be in our ability to get it done and to get things done and to get those projects built. And that will include, as you say, infrastructure. It will include, being able to move product off of our shores and get hydrogen into our distribution system and all of these pieces. But I think the other big opportunity is for us to simplify how we do all of this work together. We've got the big pieces coming out of the budget. We've got a number of programs that are very impactful. We have tax credits. And that's just at the federal level, and then there's the entire provincial system. Like, there's a lot of things that we need to do together in order to achieve this, and trying to find a way that we all throw in together to take this potential to make it happen, so that we're building the record of success and capitalizing on the moment. Like, that's really the piece that that we are going to need to be able to capture this. And so I would just say, I mean, on infrastructure, there are a lot of pieces, but it's going to depend on what our big projects are and where we go next.
Okay. I want to bring in a couple of the questions that we're getting from the participants right now, the forum. I'll, whoever wants to jump in, by all means do. First question, what keeps you up at night when you think about Canada achieving ambitious global growth in hydrogen?
I mean, Lisa this morning talked about...
Oh, do you have your microphone, John?
Sorry. Lisa talked this morning, which I thought was a great idea, which was to put together a SWAT team of the right deputy ministers at the federal level. But the provincial government also needs to be at that table because in very large measure, the provincial governments are the local permitting authority. So we need all governments acting in unison here because policy doesn't happen just within one government. And this is not something that's been done before. But look, if you stand back and just I'm a 40,000-foot guy. That's what happens when you don't know anything about anything. And I worry that all the ambitious targets that we've got for climate change, we can't meet them. It's not possible. We're not moving quickly enough. There's not the right sense of urgency. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen, and look, I'm not a climatologist, obviously. Extreme weather events are scaring the hell out of people. And are we going to get more of them? If we get more extreme weather events, you will get political will because you will get people saying, hey, we need to be doing something urgently. We can't spend 2 years permitting a renewable energy project because in this country and most other jurisdictions, we don't treat the permitting of renewable energy any different than we treat the permitting of anything else. And that is crazy. It's nuts. What are we doing? We need to get behind this in a comprehensive way because this is a huge opportunity. The Prime Minister talks about jobs and new jobs and great jobs. Where our project is based in Newfoundland, there is today over 50% of the adult population in those communities on unemployment insurance. That's nuts. All those people could be working today, right? So and that's just not a climate issue, that's a jobs issue. It's an economic development issue. It's where the future of the world is going, and Canada's got a meaningful role to play in that if we get our act together.
Mm-hmm. Let me bring in another question here, or applause. Another question here from the group, and this is most likely to you, Dr. Kaufman. What's the rationale for the EU to only direct their investment toward green hydrogen instead of prioritizing carbon intensity regardless of color?
Yeah, John a little bit talked about the problems of blue hydrogen and methane boil off and so on. So we think it's not at least not from a public funding point, to invest in blue hydrogen infrastructure. If Equinor or some companies also in Canada will do that, okay. But funding and also if you talk maybe about delivery agreements or whatever, should be go into green hydrogen projects because green is the future that we are sure about. So that is at the end the duration behind this thinking of the European Commission. And not only the European Commission, also a lot of member states. Yeah. But to say that as well, also my green German government with a green economy minister, we know that we need for the transition period for the next years to ramp up the hydrogen economy, we will also need blue hydrogen. So if the blue hydrogen is on the market, somebody will buy it for sure. It's about funding infrastructure, funding ecosystems at the end.
Okay. A bit of a technical question here. Do you believe that we can move hydrogen when we can't even move the much more energy-dense LNG? Will weight of high-pressure tanks make it uneconomical?
Yes, very clearly. So I talked about ammonia. We have a global ammonia production of 200 million tons a year, and 20 million tons of ammonia are shipped every year globally. So we have a shipping industry. We have around 200 to 300 ammonia ships. We have ammonia harbors. So we can ship hydrogen as ammonia, not as a liquid hydrogen. We don't have the ships at the moment, but for sure we can and have to ship the hydrogen as ammonia. And talking about LNG, that's what we have in Germany now. We have to import a lot of LNG, not only in Germany, but in Europe. And so we have to build up LNG terminals, and they have to be hydrogen ready. What is not that easy? We have to have the right tanks, for example, to avoid the boil off, but we are working on that.
Okay. Molly or John, this is probably a question for one of you. What is the one obstacle we need to clear in Atlantic Canada to build massive scale wind and unleash the power of green hydrogen for a new oil rush out east?
We need to get the regulatory framework locked, loaded, and ready to go. I mean, we have huge potential for offshore wind, and we're getting there. We're moving quickly, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to add in on that.
I mean, we've got this tremendous, as Molly says, offshore wind resource in Canada. We don't have a single offshore wind turbine anywhere in the country today. I mean, it's bizarre, really. And we don't have any policy around that. We don't have a regulatory framework. But the government is, and working with the provincial governments, are committed to putting that policy framework in place. And you will see investment follow the right sort of policy framework, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Another question. What role does research and the university sector play when it comes to Canada's green transition and hydrogen? Is more research funding needed?
So I think, I mean, just from my perspective, I mean, we're learning a lot right now, but there's always going to be what's next. And so we continue to invest in what the next is, and we know from the International Energy Agency, we don't have, I think it's, the statistic always changes, but 50% of the technology we need to get to net zero isn't developed yet. And so we will continue to invest through, I mean, we have programs at Natural Resources Canada, the NRC, and others, and it will continue to be an important part of the work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're about to wrap up our conversation here, but I think it's probably worthwhile to leave a closing thought. I asked each one of you to give an opening thought on hydrogen. What impression, what question, issue do you want to leave in the minds of the participants here right now when it comes to hydrogen and the potential for Canada, and Dr. Kaufman, perhaps the potential globally? Here, I'll give you a break. John, I'll start with you. I'll go down this way.
Look, Canada has been at the forefront, and this will not be well known to folks in this room. Canada was at the forefront of the hydrogen industry 100 years ago. And you asked Molly about the role of R&D. Electrolyzers at scale are still an emerging science, right? And they'll get more and more efficient. And the point is that Canada has got a meaningful role to play. It's got a legitimate seat at the table. It was a pioneer in hydrogen technology. And so I think, look, I keep telling people that I've been around for a long time, longer than most everybody in this room. I have never seen a better, bigger business opportunity that belongs here in Canada than the one we're looking at right now.
Oh yes, I see a big potential for cooperation between Canada and the European Union. So especially eastern part of Canada for green projects like your project in Newfoundland. The shipping distance is not that long from Canada to Europe, and for sure the projects are green. And the second point is I talked about at the beginning. I think there's a really big chance for cooperation also in research. You talked about electrolyzer ramping up and all these things. Europe is very strong in green technologies. Canada is strong in green technologies. So I think we should put our forces together, strengthen cooperation in research, and also in looking for production and manufacturing here. So I think IRA as well as the tax credit in Canada will attract European projects, global projects to Canada and United States. So we need some manufacturing also from German and European companies here. And that could be also a good chance for Canada. So I think there's a lot of potential for future cooperation.
Molly.
I'd say this, I mean, our mindset is, in the government, is how do we get this done? And, depending on who I'm speaking to and a number of folks here, I think that would be noted as a bit of a shift in terms how the government of Canada has thought about big projects over a period of time. And I think thinking about how we do this, how we work with everybody to do things, how we build a record of success in this space is critically important. And so how do we get this done? How do we do it in a way that supports our climate goals, our energy goals, our economic goals, our security goals? Like, this is a big deal that can help us and help our country support our prosperity as we're moving forward. So trying to figure out how we can get it done, it's a challenge that we have, it's a challenge that we all have collectively together. And so, all of the ideas that we have to support us from getting where we are to where we want to be, we are super keen to hear all of them. So thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this today.
I'm actually going to add a postscript. I'm going to ask you, John, just very quickly, because it occurs to me, you say we have a seat at the table, that we can't squander the seat. What type of time frame do you think Canada has? Is that a fair question?
We're hoping to make FID on our project before the end of this year. There are a couple of projects in Nova Scotia that could well meet that same time frame. And we hope that look, this is not one project wins, another project loses. One project will be a catalyst for a second project. A second project will be a catalyst for a third and a fourth. And we could see, by 2030, we could see, literally speaking, and I'm not exaggerating, we could see $100 billion in capital going into this industry in Atlantic Canada. Atlantic Canada's never had a $100 billion investment in anything.
John Risley, Dr. Stefan Kaufmann, Molly Johnson, thank you very much for the conversation today.